My wife called me during a meeting just to say, "Relax, I sold it, didn't think you'd mind since you're never home." I looked at my screen. I just nodded and closed my laptop. 72 hours later, the police called her at her lover's hotel room. The London Tech Investment Conference was dragging into its third day as November's early darkness settled over the city. I sat in the back of the meeting room, half listening to another startup pitch while discreetly checking my phone. As CEO and largest shareholder of Granite Loop, a fintech company pushing hard toward our Series C funding round, I should have been entirely focused. Instead, my mind drifted across the Atlantic. My marriage to Tessa had cooled considerably over the past 2 years. At 35, she'd grown increasingly distant, constantly deflecting serious conversations with vague references to meditation retreats and inner freedom. The passion that had once defined us had faded into something unrecognizable. I'd suspected something wasn't right for months, but buried myself in work instead of confronting it. My first mistake. The beachfront estate in Charleston had been my sanctuary for 7 years. I'd personally designed its structure, selected every material, and transformed it into my escape from the world. 3 weeks ago, I'd completed a comprehensive security upgrade, adding cameras to cover blind spots, facial recognition, and biometric locks. The property was solely in my name, despite Tessa's repeated suggestions we share ownership. Something always held me back from agreeing. At 11:30 p.m. in my hotel room after a strategic investor dinner, I opened my email to find a message from Tessa with the subject line, "Just a small update." The body contained only 3 sentences. "I sold the beach house. We need to sort out the finances. You don't really need it anyway, right?" I froze, staring at those words as if they were a physical wound. I didn't call, didn't reply, just sat there letting the reality sink in as the knife twisted deeper. When I finally moved, it wasn't with rage, but with precise calculation. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of an emotional response. Opening the encrypted folder labeled Property Holdings on my laptop, I methodically pulled up everything: ownership documents, the original purchase agreement, insurance policies, maintenance contracts, and security upgrade history, remotely accessing the security system. I surveyed the property: lights off, front door, closed curtains not drawn. The house appeared empty, undisturbed. No one inside. I emailed Kayla Finch, the real estate agent who'd helped me purchase the property, requesting immediate information about any recent transactions involving my beach house. Then I contacted Clark Reddington, my trusted attorney of over a decade, asking for legal assessment of a spouse selling property titled solely in my name without consent. I documented every action with military precision. 11:47 p.m. 12:11 a.m. 12:32 a.m., creating a timeline that could stand up in court if necessary. Before trying to sleep, I made one final check of the security cameras. Everything looked normal until 12:57 a.m., when headlights suddenly illuminated the back service entrance. No one emerged from the vehicle, but the lights went dark after 6 seconds, as if someone had backed away without entering. That section had no camera coverage. I'd planned to install one next week. Sleep evaded me. I put on my Bluetooth earbuds and pulled up footage from 4 nights earlier. In one frame, lasting barely 3 seconds, a male figure lingered by the perimeter fence, staring at my property. I didn't recognize him, but something in my gut told me this was just the beginning. The betrayal wasn't simply about the house. It was about the calculated deception, the casual dismantling of everything I'd built. As dawn broke over London, I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved. Tessa had no idea what she'd just started. Sleep refused to come that night. As I lay staring at the hotel ceiling, my mind began connecting dots that had been scattered throughout our marriage signs I'd willfully ignored for too long. 3 times this year, Tessa had disappeared for 10-day silent meditation retreats, where phones were supposedly prohibited. I'd accepted her explanations without question, grateful for the uninterrupted focus on work. There were those inexplicable Uber receipts originating from downtown hotels rather than her friends' addresses as she'd claimed, and the $25,000 withdrawal labeled as art startup funding, a venture that after a quick search showed no registration documents anywhere. I'd blamed myself for these disconnections, convincing myself that my demanding work schedule was the real culprit. Now I recognized the manipulation for what it was. I'd been blinded by trust while she orchestrated an elaborate deception. By morning, Clark had traced the banking transactions. His findings arrived via encrypted message, November 3rd. Tessa withdrew $175,000 from your joint account, transferring it to an anonymous cryptocurrency wallet. This matches the timing of the alleged beach house sale. His next message was more direct. If she forged your signature, Richard, we're looking at federal felony charges. 8 hours after my initial inquiry, Kayla Finch responded. My stomach clenched as I read her confirmation. A transaction for my beach house had indeed been processed on November 4th, precisely 1 day after Tessa's suspicious withdrawal. The attached documents bore what appeared to be my signature with a notary's certification of my presence during signing. I enlarged the scanned signature. The forgery was decent, but unmistakable to me. The pressure points were wrong. The final stroke too deliberate. I immediately requested the original paper documents and instructed Clark to file an administrative inquiry with the state notary board. Working methodically through old emails, I discovered something chilling. 6 months earlier, Tessa had contacted a lawyer specializing in property transfers through medical power of attorney. She had been developing a narrative about my diminished legal capacity to legitimize a false power of attorney document. My initial rage had transformed into something colder, more focused. This calculated betrayal required an equally calculated response. There would be no escape for anyone involved. That afternoon, Clark sent a private message. The beneficiary account from the property sale belongs to one Brendan Cross. 42. Not Tessa. Does this name mean anything to you? It meant nothing, but Clark's preliminary background check revealed everything. Cross had a history of gambling debts, a prior arrest for insurance fraud, and currently resided in Columbia, South Carolina. Further digging uncovered 2 commission payments from Tessa's card to an account named B Cross Ventures. In the past year, I accessed the beach house security footage from 2 weeks prior. On October 24th at 2:00 p.m., the front door camera captured a tall man in dark sunglasses exiting my home. He used a security override code, something only Tessa or I should have had access to. The biometric system showed no registered fingerprint entry, meaning he'd bypassed the primary security protocols completely. The man wasn't anyone I recognized. He moved with familiarity through my property, pausing briefly to admire the ocean view from my deck before walking toward the garage area. His casual confidence in my space felt like another violation. I switched to the exterior cameras, scrolling forward to October 25th. That's when I saw him clearly. Brendan Cross walking out of my house wearing my Patek Philippe. Watch, a rare anniversary edition I'd kept secured in the second-floor safe. The same safe that required both a biometric scan and an alphanumeric code that only I knew. Or so I'd thought. The safe had shown no signs of forced entry in any of the security logs. It remained locked according to the system records. I had never opened it during my time in London. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. Tessa must have obtained my access codes. But when, how, and what else had she taken? As I stared at the frozen image of this stranger wearing my watch leaving my home, I understood that this betrayal went deeper than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about selling my beach house. This was a calculated extraction of assets possibly planned for months or even years. The quiet fury that settled over me wasn't about the material loss. It was the methodical violation of trust, the patient deception that had unfolded while I remained oblivious. As I closed my laptop, my resolve crystallized into a single purpose. I would dismantle this scheme, piece by piece, regardless of who fell in the process. By the next morning, Clark had compiled a thorough background report on Brendan Cross. The details painted a picture more troubling than I'd anticipated. Cross ran a shell investment fund called Orion Capital Ventures, until the SEC shut him down in 2017. Clark explained during our secure video call multiple fraud allegations, but he managed to avoid criminal charges on technicalities. He's got gambling debts across 3 states, and there are reports of anonymous bounties on the dark web from creditors trying to locate him. Clark leaned closer to his camera. He's currently living in a rented apartment in Columbia under the name Ben Cosgrove. Interestingly, that's the same city where your real estate agent Kayla Finch operates. The coincidence seemed too convenient. I asked Clark to investigate any potential connection between Kayla and Cross. While waiting for his findings, I accessed an old iCloud backup that Tessa and I had once shared before she insisted on digital privacy and separate accounts. Using specialized recovery software, I was able to restore deleted text messages from the past 6 months. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. In numerous exchanges, Tessa referred to someone as simply B. Their conversations contained oblique references to the Richard exit plan, power of attorney documents ready to go. And most damning, I've got the safe codes. A recovered voice memo in Tessa's unmistakable voice drove the final nail in. Once the beach house sells, we'll have around $800K. Puerto Rico has everything we need. Tax benefits, privacy laws, fresh start. He's so buried in work he'll never catch on until it's too late. The calculated nature of their plan chilled me more than the betrayal itself. This wasn't a crime of passion or a relationship gone wrong. This was methodical theft planned over months, possibly years. I instructed Clark to send a forensic technician to assess the beach house property. Their report confirmed my fears. The second-floor safe had been accessed using an override code known only to Tessa and me. Missing were 2 luxury watches, approximately $70,000 in emergency cash I'd kept hidden, and duplicate copies of my passport and European travel visas. Clear evidence they were preparing for international escape. Even more telling was the discovery of unused airline itineraries. 2 round-trip tickets from Miami to San Juan, Puerto Rico, scheduled for departure on November 12th, just 5 days away. The names on the reservations were T. Hale and Ben Cosgrove. They weren't just stealing from me, they were planning to disappear entirely. Working through the night, Clark and I drafted formal complaints to the South Carolina Real Estate Investigation Bureau, with comprehensive documentation of the forged signatures, unauthorized property access, fraudulent property transfer, and evidence suggesting money laundering through Cross's shell accounts. "We need to move quickly," Clark advised. "I filed emergency requests to freeze all related accounts and reverse the property sale transaction, but these things sometimes move slower than we'd like." I knew we needed additional surveillance. I contacted a private investigator I'd worked with previously on corporate matters, engaging him to track Tessa's movements for the next 48 hours. If she was planning to flee, I needed advance warning. The call from Grace O'Hara caught me by surprise. We'd dated briefly in college before life took us in different directions. Now a successful real estate attorney in Phoenix, her voice carried the professional distance of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Richard, one of my clients mentioned something that raised red flags. A property in Scottsdale listed in your name is being prepared for sale by a broker, claiming to represent you through power of attorney. It's a long-term rental apartment, from what I understand." I felt the blood drain from my face. I did own an investment property in Arizona, a condominium I'd purchased 5 years ago as a tax shelter. I'd mentioned it to Tessa only in passing. "Grace, I haven't authorized any sale. Can you send me whatever documentation they're using?" Within minutes, her email arrived containing a poorly executed power of attorney document with another forged signature. The transaction hadn't completed only because the title company had flagged some inconsistencies in the paperwork. "This goes beyond the beach house. Richard," Grace warned, "you need to check every asset you own. This looks coordinated." I canceled my remaining commitments in London and rebooked my flight to return 3 days early. As I was preparing to leave for Heathrow, an anonymous message arrived in my Proton Mail account, an encrypted email service I rarely used. "She's cleaned everything out. If you don't move quickly, you'll lose what's left. The man traveling with her is armed. Be careful." The warning sent ice down my spine. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was an organized, potentially dangerous fraud scheme. I forwarded the message to Clark and instructed him to alert authorities about the potential security threat. On the transatlantic flight, I connected to the onboard Wi-Fi and accessed my banking app one last time before we lost signal. There, displayed prominently in the transaction history, was a fresh withdrawal. Tessa had transferred the remaining $12,000 from our secondary joint account to another anonymous cryptocurrency wallet. The IP address of the transaction origin stunned me. Atlanta International Airport departure gate for flights to San Juan. The timestamp was just 3 hours old. She was already on the move. While I was flying east across the Atlantic, Tessa was heading south, converting our assets to untraceable currency as she went. The race wasn't just to save my property anymore. It was to catch her before she disappeared completely. I stared out the airplane window at the darkening ocean below my reflection, a grim mask in the glass. The betrayal had metastasized into something far more sinister than I could have imagined. My wife wasn't just leaving me, she and her accomplice were systematically dismantling my life piece by calculated piece. The captain announced our initial descent into New York for my connecting flight to Charleston. I closed my laptop and prepared for landing, my resolve hardening with every mile closer to home. Tessa had no idea what was coming for her. My Charleston home came into view as the Uber rounded the corner in the late afternoon sun. I'd given no warning of my early return. The element of surprise was one of the few advantages I still possessed. Something felt immediately wrong as I approached. The front door wasn't fully latched. The curtains were drawn tight despite Tessa's usual preference for natural light, and there was a palpable sense that someone had left in a hurry. A garden hose uncoiled across the lawn. The mailbox left open. I entered silently, setting my luggage down in the foyer without a sound. From the second-floor master bedroom, Tessa's voice drifted down, casual and dismissive. "He won't do anything. Same as always. Just let him blow off steam and everything will fall back into place." A pause as the person on the other end spoke. "I know him better than you do. Richard is predictable. He'll threaten. He'll posture, but in the end he'll try to fix things. By then, we'll be gone." I climbed the stairs with deliberate steps, not bothering to mask my presence anymore. Entering our bedroom, I found Tessa standing by the window phone pressed to her ear. She startled visibly before composing herself with practiced ease. "Richard, you're back early. I was just about to call you." She ended her call without saying goodbye, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I remained in the doorway, studying the woman I'd shared my life with for nearly a decade. The familiar features now strange, rearranged by deceit. "You sold my beach house, took the money, planned to run off with your lover, stole my watch's passport, copies emptied the safe. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Her expression flickered between innocence and calculation. "It's not what you think. Brendan is just a friend. You're imagining things." Without a word, I placed my phone on the dresser and played the recovered voice memo in her own words. "Once the beach house sells, we'll have around $800K. Puerto Rico has everything we need." Then I showed her the bank statements, the security camera footage, the forged documents, methodically laying out each piece of evidence like exhibits at a trial. Her face drained of color before hardening into something unrecognizable. "Fine, I did it. But do you really think the police will help you when I tell them you've been abusive, controlling me financially, and that I've been suffering from extreme psychological distress because of you?" The threat hung in the air between us. "I have friends at 3 major news outlets." She continued, her voice gaining confidence. "One call and your reputation is finished. What do you think your investors will say when they hear how you treated your wife? How you isolated me, monitored my spending, controlled every aspect of my life?" She moved closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And your mother, should I call Ruth and tell her what her precious son is really like behind closed doors? The things you've said, the ways you've hurt me?" I remained silent, watching this performance with detached fascination. This woman, this stranger, had been planning to destroy me for months, and now she was improvising desperately. "If you drag me down, Richard, I'll make damn sure you come down with me. We'll both drown. Are you prepared for that?" I met her gaze steadily. "I won't drown. I'll survive. And I'll bring every single one of your crimes into the light." From my jacket pocket, I withdrew the official notice from the court property assets. Frozen criminal investigation underway. Potential arrest imminent. I placed it on the bed between us. Her facade cracked momentarily as she scanned the document. For just an instant, real fear flashed across her features. Then, with a theatrical collapse, she sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Brendan forced me. I was afraid. I still love you. Rich, please forgive me." The sudden shift from threats to victimhood might have been convincing if I hadn't heard her true voice on that recording. If I hadn't seen the months of careful planning. If I hadn't discovered the tickets to Puerto Rico. I picked up my carry-on bag and moved toward the door. "Nobody forced you to forge my signature. Nobody made you drain our accounts. Nobody planted cameras in my bedroom except you." She stared up at me, tears still flowing but calculations clearly running behind her eyes. "You didn't just betray me, Tessa. You thought I was a fool, and that will be the final mistake you ever make." As I walked out, a glass shattered against the wall behind me, followed by her frantic screaming, "You'll regret this. You'll regret this day for the rest of your life." I didn't look back. Her voice faded as I descended the stairs, a hollow echo of someone I'd once believed I knew. Outside, the evening air felt cleansing. My phone rang as I reached the sidewalk. Grace's name illuminating the screen. The Arizona property. She said without preamble, "She signed the sale contract yesterday, but the buyer is Brendan Cross. He's using that address to register for a false passport." I ended the call, my hand tightening into a fist. Despite everything we'd uncovered, despite freezing accounts and alerting authorities, they were still moving forward with their plan. They still believed they could escape. The confrontation with Tessa hadn't been cathartic as I'd imagined it might be. Instead, it had revealed something far more disturbing: the chasm between the woman I thought I'd married and the calculating stranger who had been living alongside me for years. Her performance had shifted seamlessly from innocence to threats to victimhood. Each persona deployed tactically when the previous one failed. As my Uber arrived to take me to the hotel where I'd be staying until this nightmare resolved, I realized that this wasn't just about recovering stolen assets anymore. This wasn't even about justice for betrayal. This had become something more fundamental, a battle against the complete distortion of truth itself. The message from Grace confirmed what I already knew. This fight was far from over. Tessa and Brendan were still maneuvering, still adapting their strategy, but they had underestimated me for the last time. The machinery of justice moved with surprising speed once Clark submitted our evidence dossier to the South Carolina Fraud Investigation Division. Within 48 hours, they opened a formal criminal case against Tessa with charges more serious than even I had anticipated. Document forgery, personal property fraud, unauthorized entry, fraudulent property transfer through fake power of attorney, and money laundering. Clark read from the official notification. They're treating this as a sophisticated financial crime, not just a domestic dispute. The gravity of the situation became clear when Tessa received a formal summons to provide testimony under the supervision of 3 federal investigators. Her smug confidence from our confrontation had apparently evaporated. Clark informed me she'd hired a high-profile defense attorney known for handling desperate clients. I received formal court documentation confirming the beach house sale had been suspended and all related assets temporarily frozen pending investigation. For the first time since discovering her betrayal, I felt a sense of partial relief. The system was working. Kayla Finch, facing potential accessory charges, agreed to cooperate with investigators. Her testimony revealed the elaborate nature of Tessa's deception. Ms. Hale provided me with what appeared to be legitimate medical power of attorney documentation. Kayla stated in her deposition, she claimed Mr. Hale had been diagnosed with latent schizophrenia, rendering him incapable of managing his assets. She supplied a psychological evaluation report, allegedly signed by Dr. Lawrence Mitchell of Charleston Psychiatric Associates. The report, like everything else in Tessa's scheme, was fraudulent. Dr. Mitchell didn't exist, and the letterhead had been expertly forged. Ms. Hale threatened legal action if I didn't expedite the transaction. Kayla continued, she said delays would cause her husband significant distress during his fragile mental state, and mentioned potential liability for triggering a crisis. This calculated manipulation demonstrated the depth of Tessa's planning. She hadn't acted impulsively or under duress, as she'd later claimed. She'd orchestrated every detail meticulously. Meanwhile, investigators were closing in on Brendan Cross. They discovered he was operating under the alias Ben Cosgrove while staying at a rental apartment in Tucson, Arizona, the same city where my investment property was located. Intelligence suggested he was in the process of obtaining falsified documents and preparing to leave for the Dominican Republic. Clark coordinated with Arizona authorities to secure an emergency arrest warrant, and surveillance was established at the apartment complex. Despite the mounting evidence, Tessa maintained her facade of innocence, telling investigators, "I was deceived. Brendan manipulated me. I never intended to betray my husband." The psychological pressure on Tessa intensified as her social circle began to disintegrate. Friends who had initially offered support withdrew after learning the extent of her deception. The PR firm where she'd worked for 3 years terminated her employment contract, citing reputational risk in an impressively euphemistic termination letter. Local media picked up the story, running headlines like, "Hundreds of thousands in alleged property fraud. Tech CEO's wife named as primary suspect." Her carefully cultivated image was crumbling publicly. Grace called one evening with an update that revealed Tessa's deteriorating position. "Tessa called me today," she said. "She was crying harder than I've ever heard anyone cry. I only told her one thing. You should pray Richard is the one judging you, not the court." Throughout this unfolding drama, I maintained complete silence toward Tessa. I declined every call, email, and message from her, directing all communication through Clark. I focused on rebuilding my life while dedicating all necessary legal resources to seeing this through. To its conclusion, I hired a specialized digital forensics team to recover and analyze data Tessa had attempted to delete. They uncovered 3 hidden bank accounts where she'd been siphoning money from our joint funds accounts established nearly 18 months before she made her move. An investigator called with a discovery that erased any lingering doubts about Tessa's culpability. We found plans for a property purchase in Puerto Rico in her secondary email account. He reported, Ms. Hale placed a substantial deposit using funds traced back to the beach house sale. The property is registered under Brendan Cross's name. This evidence completely undermined her claim that Brendan deceived me and proved her active participation in their escape plan. With the mounting evidence, prosecutors formally charged Tessa. Her preliminary hearing was scheduled for 45 days later. I immersed myself in work, refusing to let her betrayal define my future. The legal process would unfold without requiring my emotional investment. The evidence spoke for itself. 3 days after the charges were filed, a small package arrived at my temporary residence. It bore no return address, just my name in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside lay my grandmother's platinum band. The wedding ring I'd had custom designed for Tessa, now broken cleanly in 2 pieces. Accompanying it was a handwritten note. "Congratulations, you've won, but I still have one last card to play." The implied threat sent me immediately to my security app. The footage showed a hooded figure standing outside my house at 3:00 a.m., lingering for nearly 4 minutes before placing the package and disappearing into the darkness. I forwarded the footage to Clark and the investigators, adding another layer to the ongoing case. The message wasn't just about returning the ring. It was Tessa's way of saying she wasn't finished, that she still believed she had leverage or power in this situation. What she failed to understand was that her threats no longer held any weight. The evidence against her was overwhelming, her deception fully exposed. Whatever last card she thought she possessed would only further incriminate her in a system already prepared to hold her accountable. As I placed the broken ring in a drawer, I felt not anger, but a profound sadness for the woman who had chosen this path, who had calculated that destroying our life together was preferable to simply leaving honestly. The broken platinum pieces seemed a fitting metaphor for what remained of our marriage, something once precious, now irreparably damaged by betrayal. After 3 months of legal proceedings, the court officially restored full ownership of my beach house to me. Standing alone on its weathered deck watching waves crash against the shore, I made a decision: this place wouldn't remain a monument to betrayal. It would become a symbol of rebirth. I hired a renovation team with a simple directive: transform this space into something entirely new. We demolished the master bedroom where Tessa had planted hidden cameras, replacing it with an expansive library filled with books I'd always wanted to read but never found time for. The guest room became a photography studio with state-of-the-art equipment, and the rarely used formal dining area transformed into a painting studio, fulfilling an artistic passion I'd abandoned in my 20s. When the work was complete, I renamed the property Second Haven. Not just a clever play on words, but a statement of intent. This place would be my second chance, my new beginning. "You've literally rebuilt your life," Clark remarked during his first visit to the renovated property. Most people just mean that figuratively. With the property secure and the legal battle progressing steadily, I reclaimed other parts of myself that had been compromised during my marriage. I booked trips to Italy, Japan, and Egypt, destinations Tessa had dismissed as too cultural or waste of time, whenever I'd suggested them. Each journey became a rediscovery of the person I'd been before I began silencing my own desires to maintain domestic peace. In Venice, inspired by the city's ethereal light, I curated a small photography exhibition titled The Silence of Betrayal, a series of images capturing abandoned spaces reclaimed by nature. The collection received modest acclaim in independent art circles, validating a creative side I'd suppressed for too long. When I returned to the business world, speaking at an investment conference in New York, colleagues noted the change. "You seem different." One investor commented, "More present somehow." What she didn't say, but what I understood, I was no longer half of a partnership that had been draining my energy for years. Meanwhile, justice followed its inevitable course. After a 3-month trial, Tessa received a 14-year prison sentence with no possibility of parole for the first 5 years. The charges that stuck: document forgery, property fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to conceal criminal identity, painted the complete picture of her calculated betrayal. Brendan Cross was apprehended at Houston International Airport attempting to use a falsified passport. He was extradited to South Carolina, charged separately, and denied bail as a flight risk. His prior record ensured the court showed little leniency. In her final statement before sentencing, Tessa remained defiant, never once directing an apology toward me. "I only followed my instincts," she told the court. "If he considers that betrayal, then I'm only sorry that I got caught." Her words confirmed what I already knew. The woman I'd married had never truly existed. The person standing in that courtroom was the real Tessa, finally unable to maintain her elaborate performance. A month after her sentencing, Clark informed me that Tessa had requested a final meeting. "She wants one opportunity to apologize in person." He explained. I declined without hesitation. Instead, I sent her a photocopy of our wedding photo, cut precisely down the middle with a handwritten note. "I forgive you, but forgiveness isn't a door back to my life." Or, it wasn't cruelty, it was closure. The final severance of a connection that had become toxic to my very identity. That spring, Grace and I began spending more time together. What started as professional consultation evolved into friendship and gradually into something more. During a picnic along Charleston's waterfront, she observed, "You're alive again, I can see it." There was no rush toward romance, no desperate attempt to replace what I'd lost. But for the first time since the betrayal, I recognized that I wasn't alone. There were people in my life who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide or represent. On the 1-year anniversary of reclaiming my beach house, I stood on its rooftop deck, watching the sunset paint the ocean in deepening shades of amber and gold. In my hand, I held the final divorce decree, the document officially ending my 9-year marriage. I struck a match and watched as the flame caught the paper's edge, turning legal jargon to ash that scattered over the railing and drifted toward the sea below. The act wasn't about revenge, it was release. I had won back something far more valuable than property or money. I had reclaimed myself. People often asked if I regretted what happened, suggesting I had lost so much. I would smile and reply, "No, I've only just begun to regain everything." Tessa's dismissive words echoed occasionally in my thoughts. "You don't really need that beach house anyway, right?" She had been profoundly wrong. I did need it, not as a residence, but as a reminder that no one could take my life from me unless I allowed it. Standing there as twilight deepened around me, I understood something essential about betrayal and recovery. The deepest wounds aren't inflicted by what others take from us, but by what we surrender willingly, believing we must sacrifice ourselves to preserve relationships that never truly existed. My beach house. My second haven wasn't just a property restored to its rightful owner. It was a declaration of self-recovery, a statement that what breaks us doesn't define us. What defines us is how we rebuild. As darkness settled over the water and the first stars appeared, I closed the door on the past, not with bitterness, but with gratitude for the harsh lesson that had ultimately set me free.